Welcome to the fourth part of our lecture, chapter 14 on the Renaissance. This is the early Renaissance sculpture and architecture. While Brunelleschi would lose again to Ghiberti when a second set of baptistry doors was offered in competition, he would have a greater triumph as an architect. He actually decided to stop being a sculptor since he couldn't be the best in the world and go over to architecture. The world-renowned dome of the Florence Cathedral is his creation. The cathedral originally begun in 1296, with a tower designed by Giotto, was nearly complete when Brunelleschi began work on it in 1420. But it had a huge hole at its center. The space for the dome, nearly 140 feet wide, remained open to the elements, much too wide for any of the known building methods. So here's another kind of invention of the Renaissance. The idea that you can start working on something, even if you don't know how you're going to finish it, and that you will figure out how to do the other parts when you get to them. So you have a faith that that you can invent and solve problems later to complete a project. So that's interesting. Now, this dome, the Romans had domes. The Romans had domes. But a lot of that knowledge of the classical world was lost. It was lost due to several things, but a major thing is Christianity in itself. That to start studying the science and medicine and architecture of the classical world would be studying knowledge that belonged to pagans, the people that were not Christian. And so what the Europeans did is they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. They decided that if they couldn't follow their religion, then they wouldn't study anything that they did. Now, the Muslims, on the other hand, they did not work like that. They went ahead and took all the knowledge and learning of the classical world and enveloped that in with their own religious beliefs. So in a major way, the Muslims held on to the knowledge of the classical world and the ancient world and ended up giving it back to Europe. So a dome presents a unique engineering challenge. How to support a great weight. The first dome would 880 million pounds over a great distance with support only on a roof's edges. While the Pantheon dome covered approximately the same expanse as the Cathedral of Florence, the methods of the ancient Roman engineers had been lost during the Middle Ages. That's what I had just been mentioning. Fortunately, after two humiliating defeats to Ghiberti, Brunelleschi had gone to Rome to study the ruins of the ancient buildings. By using the results of his studies, combining them with medieval techniques, and by inventing many new ones over 14 years of construction, Brunelleschi was able to solve the problem that baffled all of his countrymen. While his engineering achievement was marvelous, the beauty of the dome was even more awe-inspiring. A herringbone pattern of red bricks was framed by 8 white ribs that reached up to a lantern at the peak. The dome of the cathedral became the focal point of the city of Florence and remains so today. Once it was built, Brunelleschi became the most famous architect of his day. He continued to take many trips to Rome to study the classical architecture of the ruins and led the revival of interest in the culture of ancient Greece and Rome. These ruins become an important source for Renaissance artists, and a pilgrimage to Rome would become a required part of an artist's education for centuries. Brunelleschi's use of the forms of classical architecture in an imaginative way in order to achieve harmony and beauty would be an example followed for the next 500 years by almost every architect. Brunelleschi's study of the ancient monuments of the Greeks and Romans and Giotto's concern for the individual were two main ingredients of humanism, the predominant philosophy of the Renaissance and catalyst for the period's great achievements. Humanism is the predominant philosophy of the Renaissance and catalyst for the period's great achievements. Its two main ingredients were the study of the ancient cultural achievements of the Greeks and Romans and respect for the individual. Donatello. While Brunelleschi went to study the ruins of Rome, he went with his friend Donatello, a young man who would become the greatest sculptor of his time. Donatello had been a student of Ghiberti, but his achievements far surpassed his teacher, almost single-handedly creating the Renaissance style of sculpture. St. Mark was done when he was 25 years old. It shows he already had great understanding of anatomy and form. So it is the anatomy of the body that you can see underneath the drapery that you see here. We can see how the body shifts its weight at the hips, reminiscent of Greek statues like Doryphoros nearly 2,000 years before. Donatello's advance from the medieval style is very apparent when compared to what was naturalistic in its own time, Pisano's Annunciation. Rather than a crowded scene with many stories, we have a freely moving individual. We can see not only Donatello's mastery of the real features of a human body, but also his ability to give a sculpture personality. Unlike Greek sculpture, Donatello's is not godlike but human. St. Mark is dignified and thoughtful, his features strong but not perfect. He is a man who has lived on our earth and seen much. His hair is thinning and his brow is wrinkled. The statue was commissioned by the Linen Drapers Guild of Florence, whose patron saint was St. Mark. It is therefore not surprising that Donatello paid an extraordinary amount of attention to the drapery on his statue. Now, how was that done? Well, originally, there was Donatello would make a clay sculpture of a nude St. Mark. Then he would take unlike Greek sculpture, Donatello's is not godlike but human. St. Mark is dignified and thoughtful, his features strong but not perfect. He is a man who has lived on our earth and seen much. His hair is thinning and his brow is wrinkled. The statue was commissioned by the Linen Drapers Guild of Florence, whose patron saint was St. Mark. It is therefore not surprising that Donatello paid an extraordinary amount of attention to the drapery on his statue. Now, Donatello would make this sculpture in a way that most Renaissance human in the round sculptures were made. And that is to first create a nude statue out of clay, and then take linens and soak them in watered down clay and wrap the body of the statue in these linens, then allow that to dry. That would be the model from whence the block of marble would then be carved. The fabric seems to flow naturally with the body, as if the ancient Venus de Milo, and is even inscribed with detailed embroidery. The Linen Drapers Guild was not one of the wealthier ones in Florence, so St. Mark was made of marble rather than more expensive cast bronze. A more affluent patron, probably a member of the ruling Medici family, commissioned David. He was the first freestanding life-size bronze figure since ancient times. Donatello was one of the first artists of the Renaissance to work from live models and to follow the Greek style of portraying David nude. For Donatello and other Renaissance artists, nudity was no longer shameful, as in the medieval period, but beautiful and capable of representing humanity's highest ideals. Donatello's David is barely an adolescent, a boy who seems incapable of such tremendous deed. He is almost effeminate. His muscle seems too weak to even lift Goliath's sword, yet below him is Goliath's severed head, which the young boy is rolling around with his foot. How could this child defeat the giant Goliath? Donatello's answer to this riddle is also the meaning of the Old Testament tale. Miracles can be accomplished only with the assistance of God. If Donatello had created a muscle-bound David, the miraculous nature of the story would be lost. Yet the boy seems unaware of the divine intercession. Instead, he is proud of his own accomplishment. Pride would remain David's few, even if king of the Israelites. So he will have to face problems that come from his pride. Donatello, David, 1428 to 1432. That is the end of the fifth part of chapter 14.